Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. There is something really invigorating to me about being the inaugural person in a position, being able to get everything set up the way it needs to be set up, making sure the team is aligned in the right ways, professionalizing things if that's something that needs to happen. And that is why I am so excited to be talking to Justin Bell, who is the Vice President for Marketing and Communications at Fordham University. We're going to talk about all the things that Justin has done to take Fordham's marketing and communications to the next level. I hope you enjoyed the show.
Whether it's prospective students and their parents, whether it's influencers like counselors or employers who we want to employ our graduates, or even alumni, right? We have to build trust with our audiences, and you can't always get that done through your channels. And so I think more and more experiential is a hot new ticket.
You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO with Jamie Hunt, your source for insight and inspiration on the issues shaping higher ed marketing. From AI and branding to enrollment strategy and leadership, each episode explores the ideas, challenges, and opportunities facing today's marketing leaders. Let's get into it. Hey, Justin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. It's great to be here.
I am really excited about this conversation. When I shared with someone that I was going to have you on the show, they were like, I have to know more about that pizza thing that you did for NACAC. So that trust that's on the agenda. I want to hear more about that.
Sure.
But before we get into that, I've been so impressed with the work that you've been doing at Fordham. I've been following it for a while. You were a finalist for the Higher Ed Marketer of the Year award this year. Well deserved to be a finalist. And I want to hear a little bit more because I get asked about this a lot. When you stepped into that role of being VP, you quickly reorganized that into more of an in-house agency. And I'm really curious about what prompted that move. Like, what was there something broken or something not optimal? And how did you know it needed to change?
Coming into the role, I was actually taking two separate teams, a comms team and a marketing team, and bringing them together. So I'm the inaugural VP of marketing comms. The two teams had traditionally been separated, but worked together, right? We're reporting up into advancement, which is kind of a typical model that I'm not crazy about. I'm thrilled that President Tetlow had this vision to bring the division out as its own entity, reporting up to her. It shows a level of importance I think Fordham puts on marketing comms, which is really important. You know, the first 6 months was really just about listening and really understanding what's the landscape, not only from my own team, but from colleagues, from cabinet members, partners across the organization, to understand what's working well, what's worked, what are the challenges, and then really listening to my team understand, one, how is it working, but how happy are they, right? And how are they measuring their work? How do they feel like their work is coming to fruition? And it quickly surfaced that we had a lot of redundancy because of two teams coming together. And I come from the agency world. So I worked for Omnicom and many agencies for 15 plus years before finding the lovely higher ed landscape, which I absolutely love. And so I think I wanted to bring some of my best practices that I knew worked from the agency world and find ways to maximize the talent, because the talent was phenomenal, but it wasn't being maximized. So we did go through a pretty big reorg. I came in August, and by that following May, we were doing the reorg. So, a good 6 months as we were also then leaning into the rebrand, but it's paid dividends. There's a lot more clarity around what are people doing, what are their goals. But then not only are we set up centrally, there's a lot of decentralized marketers and communicators across the schools and the colleges. And we really set ourselves up to be center of excellence or center of expertise for them because they need support. And I think we found that right balance, and we've hit a stride at this point, which is really exciting.
So what does the agency model look like for you all?
It's more about bringing certain areas of expertise together. So as an example, and I did this when I was at Ohio State, I was building a brand marketing team at Ohio State, which also was separate from comms. It was up through advancement. So it was actually a very similar process. But, one of the things I've done at both institutions is I brought all the channels together into one team. So email marketing, automation, website, and social media, I brought that into a channel engagement team so that you could be thinking about what's that omni-channel experience. So they're working in tandem, they have shared goals. And, that's just one example where on the agency side, you see that a lot, those channels working in tandem together. But you don't see a lot in higher ed. People aren't thinking about channel engagement. They're just thinking, I think, very siloed about, well, here's what my social engagement is, and here's my enrollment marketing needs on the website. And then we think about email marketing. So that's one example, right? But also thinking about, just from a creative and brand perspective, creating a team that can support all the different segments of the UMC team. So thinking about multimedia centrally within a creative team, rolling up to a senior creative director, and they're supporting communications, they're supporting marketing, they're supporting all facets of the team, rather than having a designer or a creative over here working with just this one subset of the team, right? So it allows folks like creatives to learn aspects of the business, and it gives them a pipeline for growth, which is really important in higher ed, because a lot of times there's not tons of upward mobility sometimes in these teams. And this creates that. It creates more of that momentum and a stickier organization. And it's paid off. We've not had a lot of turnover. I think a lot of folks are happy with the way they can contribute to the work, because they can have their expertise, but then be waking up every day doing something a little different because they're supporting their broader team through different reporting structures.
I love the intentionality that you had. I've been an inaugural VP before, and there's this temptation to just like throw yourself in and get it set up. Like, it worked this way somewhere else, so this is how it's going to work here. And I think it's so critically important to take the time to listen. And I hope listeners, if you're thinking about that next step for yourself, realizing that I actually don't think going fast and breaking stuff is the right approach for doing a reorg, because I think in the end, you may lose some good people who get sort of bruised around in the process.
Yep.
And it just gives you so much more insight into what the institution needs and wants. I mean, those are two different things, needs and
Correct.
wants. But
Yes.
if you have to answer their need, but you also have to speak to their want on a certain level.
Yeah, and you only get one chance to do it right. And I think to take the time to get it right is really important. And so part of it also is, yes, listening and coming back and digesting that and figuring out with other members of your team. So what does this mean? What could this look like? And it's trying to be as transparent as possible with your team members through that reorg where you can, to pressure test your thinking, because to have their brain trust as part of the process, you might not be able to show them every single card in your hand, but making sure that they feel bought in and there's as much visibility and transparency to the process is really important. But take your time, because you can only do it once. And if it goes afoul, right, you lose not only credibility with your team, but also with every single partner you're trying to build relationships with across the institution.
Yeah, it's really tricky. Everything you're saying is like speaking to me. I love that you're talking about engaging the team. I think there's also this temptation from some folks to just, if I don't solve the problem myself, then it's, people will think less of me because I brought other voices. When you first arrived, what did you prioritize first? Was it the structure? Was it the strategy? Was it the talent? What was it, the culture? Where did you go first?
Listening.
I love it.
Listening was priority, but it was really with the intention of learning and listening for two very different topics and themes. One is, how is the current structure or the team supporting the organization today? That's bucket one. And then how are we telling our story from a brand perspective? So I kind of did dual listening, if you will, with a lot of different stakeholders across every corner of the institution, even with folks outside the institution. I talked to employers, I talked to alumni, donors, board of trustees, to really understand. And in some cases, I talk more about the brand work and tell me, what is your elevator pitch? Why Fordham, right? Versus internally, it was more of a mixed bag of, let's talk about how is the team supporting you today? Now tell me, how do you sell Fordham? And so I killed two birds with one stone with a lot of that listening, which took a good 6 months. That was priority number one. And that quickly informed, A, we need a reorg. I need to restructure this. And two, we need to think about the brand. I didn't know at that point how much of a rebrand we needed to do, because we needed to do audience research to really, I think, tell us how deep or how broad we needed to go. But I knew we needed to change the structure, and I knew we needed to work on the brand. And those two things became kind of these, I don't want to say competing priorities, but I had to keep both of them moving at the same time. And luckily, we were able to do that with agency partners and also trying to move, in a very quick, nimble way on the org side, so that when it got into kind of the heart of doing the brand work, the reorg was in place and we were structured, ready to lean in and do the research, create the brand, test, and go to market.
How important was your president's support in this process?
Extremely important. I think through the interview process, knowing that this was an inaugural role, that there was two teams coming together, there hadn't been the focus on modern marketing and communication strategy at Fordham. That was kind of missing because you had these two teams not really working in tandem. And so I knew coming in that the president was interested in how do we modernize the practice, but also how do we set ourselves up for a successful brand growth. And so I think just knowing that that was already top of mind for her and she was open to that was one of the reasons why I took the role. Because I love coming in and driving change. I'm a big change agent. I get a lot of energy out of that. And I don't want to say fixing issues because it wasn't that I was out to fix the issue, out there to improve things. That was one of the reasons why I came here. I really felt that not only was President Tetlow on board with being nimble and changing and investing, but she had built a cabinet around her that was also really adopting this notion of we have to move fast. We have to be comfortable with change. And if we don't, we're going to have some issues just given all the pressures with higher ed.
Listeners, I cannot stress enough how important it is to understand what level of support you're going to get from leadership if you're interviewing for a senior position like this, particularly if it's inaugural. Like you have to know that the president or the chancellor or whatever has your back, will be in your corner, will give you the resources that you need when people inevitably are upset or frustrated, because change is hard. People tend to like the way things are, or at least be afraid of change. You need to know that you have the president at your back. And I'm curious, what did you listen for in those interviews to ascertain that that was the case?
One was just listening to how other cabinet members and leaders were engaging with the president, right? Mm-hmm. How was she evolving the cabinet structure? What was she doing to find the right mix of talent and personality that was really to create and introduce being more nimble into what we know as a sector that doesn't always like to move fast, right? Or take risks. We all love to say that we're innovative, but to be innovative, you have to be nimble and move at a certain pace that you can compete. And so I think just listening and hearing other cabinet members and having some really long conversations with what would be my future peers to understand their perspective was really important. But to also ask the tough questions, right? And just to be point blank, if I was to come in and hypothetically say we need to do X, Y, and Z, what would that support look like? How could I count on you as my president or as my colleague? And then lastly, what are you willing to invest? These types of changes, whether it's a restructure or it is evolving a brand, it takes investment, and it takes not only a financial investment, but risk taking that not every leader wants to take. And I think asking the question and really having them say, here's how I think you could show up, and hearing that firsthand solidified why it was the right move to come to Fordham.
I think sometimes it's like we can get stars in our eyes about a new job, and it can seem so fantastic and great, but I really encourage people to ask the deeper questions to make sure, because it's really challenging if you don't have the support to move the needle, and then you're feeling excited and enthusiastic and you know it needs to change, but when you can't, that's just tough.
It just becomes more frustrating, right? Because you know that you could be achieving so much more. And so to have that runway, to know there's trust and the ability to run your own business. And I think that's where President Tetlow, she has created a cabinet that she trusts, a cabinet where we don't tell each other, no, swim in your lane. We actually ask each other, come swim in my lane. What am I not thinking about? And I think it requires a level of trust, openness, and commitment and respect amongst cabinets to be able to operate in that way, which I'm thrilled that I'm able to be such part of such a nimble and creative cabinet here that is open to you swimming in their lane, and it's encouraged.
There's something truly magical about being on a cabinet with people who work well together,
Yeah.
where there's no territoriality, there's no like you're saying, get out of my lane, or people are engaging with each other with intentionality. I was so lucky when I was at Miami University to have just the absolute best cabinet colleagues in the world there. They were that just so warm, welcoming in the middle of COVID,
Yeah.
and then just so good at crossing those boundaries. And the admissions, the enrollment management VP, he's my bestie, like
Yeah.
for the rest of my life.
Yep.
Fantastic, fantastic to have that. I want to talk a little bit about the changes you actually made.
Mhm.
So one of the things that really struck me was this idea of having dashboards for the writers on the team, which I'm in love with.
Mhm.
But it integrated performance metrics with real-time AI coaching. Tell me
Yeah.
what that looks like.
Yeah, it's well, when I walked into kind of reimagining what this organization looks like, we didn't have anyone waking up thinking about performance metrics. We didn't have an analyst, right? There's some data driven decision making that was happening, but it was really basic. It's, what's our web traffic? What's our bounce rate? What's our click to open rate? And so one of the new roles that I added in the new org was a performance analyst, getting someone on board
Mhm.
that from a data science perspective could really help us understand how are we performing, and then think proactively, how can we use different data inputs to make us work smarter, harder, and better? And so one of the things that we've done over the last year is create these dashboards. And it goes a step further than saying, okay, I wrote this story and I can actually click on that story and I can see the number of hits and the scroll depth, and that's all important. But it really put more predictive modeling into it to help us think about, yes, what's the performance, but had you incorporated or integrated these other keywords in the headline or the story, it could have performed better.
Mm.
And so it's a tool that not only kind of drives a behavior of being data driven from a content creator perspective, but it gives you recommendations and tools that, next time you might want to think about these keywords, and here's why. And so it was taking data driven performance metrics along with modeling from AI to sit there and say, if I'm in the ecosystem looking at Google, had you integrated these things, it could have performed X% better.
Wow.
And so, our content writers are really able to go a step further than just saying, how did this perform? But think about, well, the next time I'm in this predicament to write this story, how can I write it to be more SEO friendly? And what it's done, it's created a behavior where now they're out in different tools that we offer them, searching different keywords for the headline, right? Before they even start to get into finalizing that story. And that's the behavior we're looking for. And what we've been able to see is just the performance of SEO content has skyrocketed because we're being that much more intentional. The stories are still authentic, and we have to be authentic in our storytelling. We don't want to sway from that. But what it's doing is we're not just talking to ourselves. We're actually now getting that organic traffic from Google and Yahoo and other platforms because we do have these tools in our back pocket to make them work harder and work smarter.
Let's take a quick break to talk about something big happening this summer, Engage Summit 2026. The next era of higher ed isn't about adding more tools. It's about building an agentic campus where AI works alongside your teams to recruit smarter, support students faster, and scale impact without burning people out. From real-world examples of agentic systems in action to hands-on sessions that show how AI can coordinate enrollment, marketing, advising, and operations, Engage Summit 2026 is where institutions move from experimentation to execution. If you're ready to design a campus where AI doesn't just assist, but instead acts, learns, and drives outcomes, then you want to be in Charlotte June 15th through the 17th. But it gets even better. As an Enrollify listener, you can grab your ticket for half off. Just head to engage.element451.com and use code HUNT50 to apply the 50% off discount. That's HUNT50. Okay, let's get back to the conversation. I'm absolutely in love with this. I feel like one of the things I hear all the time is how do we get more data-driven content creators? And this just sort of takes that to the next level. And I'm really curious because when I do AI workshops around the country, often the people that have their arms crossed in the back and are looking at me like with their eyes sort of narrowed are the writing folks. And so I'm really curious about how they reacted to having AI be part of their daily workflow.
Yeah, it varied greatly. A lot of our writers are trained journalists, as are a lot of writers in higher ed, right? And so there comes with that the sense of pride, and I can never have AI tell me what to write and how to write. This dashboard is really about pressure testing to help you brainstorm deeper and with more intentionality and more thought before you just dig right in, right? And so I think the team has quickly warmed up to that. For those that might have been a little skeptical, we had others that are super excited because they see the power of AI. But I think they've quickly realized this isn't about replacing the work they do. It's about supplementing the work to help them work smarter, because every single writer, every journalist, every storyteller wants more eyeballs on their content to do all that work and for it to not get any eyeballs. I think once they started to see the more they can lean into these tools, the more organic reach it's going to have, which drives the eyeballs, then they can see the dividends of using AI as a tool to maximize their work and maximize their story. So yeah, there's always a little hesitancy, I think, but then they start to see how it really impacts the reach of their stories. And that's where they see the trade-off in a very positive light.
Well, and certainly you don't necessarily want people to move on, but it is great for their portfolios to be able to have some data to say, I did this and this expanded our reach by this amount, or to have some more concrete numbers that you can share. Is this a tool that you built, or is this something that's available for people?
We built it from the ground up.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Wow.
our data analyst, he is a brilliant genius, I would say. And it kind of came together over time, right? It's like, I'm a big believer of crawl, walk, run. And the first part was just getting them performance data and getting them used to looking at performance data. What's the click rate? What's the bounce rate? How far are they scrolling? And then trying to think about, so if we're getting a 75% scroll, what stories are scrolling that far down that they're actually spending the time and this page is sticky? Is it short form? Is it long form? Is it listicle? So we started there before we layered on top of the additional bells and whistles, which included the AI piece of SEO. And so, it was a warming up process, but homegrown, and we're still trying to figure out how do we keep making that better.
That's amazing. I'm super impressed that you homegrown in this. I don't know what the right way to say that is, but I'm imagining you're probably going to get a bunch of people asking you about it after this episode.
Maybe we'll productize it and sell it. I don't know.
Right? I mean, what a tremendous resource. And I mean, honestly, I'm pretty sure corporate America is doing these sorts of things,
I'm sure.
particularly with content marketing. I know, I have a friend whose husband is at a daily newspaper as the digital editor, and they are hyper focused on metrics and how they can improve opens and how they can improve read throughs. So,
of course,
this is a direction higher ed needs to go, and I'm super impressed.
Yeah, thank you.
I want to pivot a little bit because you have so many bold things that you've been doing in the past. What have you been there, like
2.5 years?
Wow. You've been
Time
busy.
flies.
One of the things I want to talk about is the Jimmy Fallon The Weekend pop-up concert.
Yes.
And I'm curious a little bit about the story about how that came about. But then I think what I really want to understand is, how do you evaluate something like that to figure out whether it's a PR stunt, or is it something that's strategic and going to move you towards your goals or your strategic objectives?
One of the great things about being in New York is Fordham students have the opportunity to do a lot of internships, right? Rather than being in the middle of the country, maybe in the middle of a state where you don't have a lot of companies around you. Here in New York, our our students can be going and getting internships every single semester. And so we had a student that was interning at the Jimmy Fallon show, and they were talking about just kind of in their production meeting, well, we wish we could crash a graduation party. We would love to do that. And they knew they had the weekend coming on the show. And so it was kind of a concept they thought about. And she just raised her hand and said, well, I know, Fordham would love to have you down the road. They're having a couple parties, which we typically do. We have like we had a lunch and a barbecue for our different seniors. And we have two campuses, a campus in the Bronx and a campus in Manhattan at Lincoln Center. And so, they called us up and said, hey, we're thinking about doing this. Would you be interested? And I'll be honest, they called a different department, not the UMC department. And at first, they got a no. They're like, well, no, this can't happen. You're trying to come in and do this in a day. This is the same week as graduation. We just don't have the resources. And I got wind of that. And I said, let us get in touch from a PR perspective, right? I think we could figure this out. And I'm glad we did. Within 2 hours, the full production team was at Fordham that afternoon doing a walkthrough with us. And the next day, there was a senior luncheon already planned. Just something simple where they were going to bring Chipotle in and celebrate the seniors. And so what we quickly did is we turned that into a bigger party, a surprise, where Jimmy showed up. And then all of a sudden he's like, well, let me bring out another guest. And it was the weekend that did a short concert. So it was thanks to our intern, first and foremost.
Wow.
But it was also, I think, just trying to be comfortable with doing something outside the box, because the initial reaction was like, oh no, we can't get that done. And we were like, well, no, let's push a little. Let's think outside the box. How could we get this done? Because it's not every day that the Tonight Show with The Weeknd is knocking on your door saying, can we come and just do a free pop-up? So we figured it out. They did the production the next day. They were loading in at 6 a.m. the next morning. It just happened so quickly. And so to think about, is this a PR stunt versus is it worthwhile? The number one driver of our decision was, first and foremost, can this be an authentic experience that our students can actually enjoy? And it really was. We already had a party that was planned. We just kind of grew on top of that planning and tried to make it an even more special experience for the students. And that was decision number one. Yes, the byproduct was, it was a great PR opportunity for us. It went viral worldwide. They're still tagging us in Flashback Fridays that are getting millions of views. We just had that a couple weeks ago. And, quite honestly, Jimmy Fallon and The Weeknd were phenomenal. I mean, they were so great with our students, meeting and greeting with, certain members of the community behind the scenes. And we would do it all over again anytime.
And that is a New York experience.
Yeah.
I mean, as much as I love Miami University, that's not going to happen in Oxford, Ohio.
Yeah. And I think it's one of the perks of being Fordham in New York are these opportunities that just pop up, whether it's opportunities for our students, whether it's opportunities for us to collaborate with different influencers that are in town. The great thing about Fordham is we have two beautiful campuses in the city, and we're doing filming all the time for Netflix or Hulu or HBO. And so the opportunities to collaborate with celebrities, it comes up a lot, and you're not going to get that at a lot of other schools. So we have to maximize that. It has to be the right collaboration. Again, it has to be the right student experience, has to be aligned with our brand pillars. But we try to maximize that as much as possible and look for those opportunities to collaborate.
So you this out of the box thinking thing, we talked about this a little bit at the very beginning, but can you tell me a little bit about the pop-up pizza shop that you did at NACAC last year?
Yeah. What we were looking for at NACAC is we had this new brand, and we knew part of our enrollment strategy and part of the reorg that we went through is we actually established a enrollment marketing team within our team. So enrollment marketing sits wholeheartedly within UMC for undergraduate admissions. And so we want to think about, well, who's the influencers that we need to start building relationships with? And low-hanging fruit is high school guidance counselors, and so knowing that NACAC is that one opportunity every year where all these counselors come together, we wanted to think outside the box. And yes, we can put our name on the tote bag. We can put a free tchotchke in that bag. We could sponsor the conference, but for the money we were going to potentially sponsor, we said, well, what could we do differently? And so we wanted to bring a New York experience to Columbus because a lot of those high school counselors, they can make it to that conference, but they may never be able to come to New York. The idea came up at first, well, let's just do a food truck and let's bring a New York food item to a food truck and just drive the food truck up and down High Street in Columbus and try to engage. And so we kept noodling on that and found that the food truck was too hard. And ideally, there is a New York style pizza shop right across the street from the conference center. And we saw the opportunity on the first day of the conference. They started at, 8 o'clock and they had a break for lunch, but they weren't offering lunch at the conference. And we said, well, why don't we offer free pizza at this pizza
Nice.
parlor across the street and call it the Fordham Pizza Shop? And so one thing led to another. We worked with our agency partner, Ology, who's in Columbus and knows it like they're in the back of their hand. And we stood up this Fordham Pizza Shop across the street, and we had, of the 7,000-ish visitors that are at that conference, we had just shy of 1,000 come through the event within one day, had a
Wow.
line around the block. And it was a big success because it was filling a need because they needed to eat for lunch. It was outside the box where everyone's intrigued by, well, what's this Fordham Pizza Shop? Because you don't see higher ed brands doing experiential like this very often, except for maybe at athletic sporting events or other things. So I think the intrigue drove people to come and engage. But then we had a whole strategy. If you were to come through the pizza shop and we can gather your information, then we followed up with you by sending you a free pennant to their high school to hang up in their office. We engaged them on email to build a relationship. And now that activation has turned into a relationship where we're reaping the reward of really being top of mind with those guidance counselors so they can recommend Fordham to the students who make sense.
I love the creativity around it and that you're finding a need, filling it, and that is ultimately putting your brand in front of them. How do you sell these bold ideas internally? Because higher ed can be really risk adverse.
Yeah.
I've been at really risk adverse institutions. I've been at like do whatever you want institutions, but like how do you sell these to people?
A lot of conversations, but in everything that we do, we're tracking data. So it might be a little harder to sell the first time around, but then we bring the receipts and we're like, okay, so here's what we're seeing. So as an example, the pizza shop, our investment, we expect to reap that investment, the ROI, over 2 to 3 years. It doesn't happen overnight. But just this recruitment cycle, we're already seeing the benefits of that pop-up. Because this is in Columbus, we saw a 50% increase in applications to the cycle from Ohioans.
Wow.
And then we saw a 47% increase nationwide from those high school guidance counselors that were there.
Wow.
Those high schools, we saw a 47% increase in apps. So already we're seeing the benefits of just application volume from those counselors that we were engaging with. Now, we'll have to see, how do they yield? Do they show up in the fall, right? We were still tracking that, but to have that tangible data to go back and say, okay, we want to keep doing experiential. Here's the receipts. Here's the value that we're seeing early. Then we can keep investing, and it builds credibility in the work that you're doing. And I think it's important to have a plan, showcase what that plan is. What's the benefits you anticipate coming out of it? How are you measuring that from a data perspective? And then the feedback loop, come back and show them that data, what's happening, because now we're thinking, because of this, our president's asking, well, what are we doing in NACAC in Minneapolis? Right? And there's almost an expectation. We're getting that question from everyone. There's almost like, okay, so now what are you guys going to do? Part of it is conversations, building awareness, but also tracking that data so that when you want to come and do it again, you really have a hard ROI that you can point to, that dollars in is going to mean recruitment dollars out.
Yeah. I mean, success leads to more opportunity.
Totally.
In the places I've been where I've had sort of a absolute free reign to do outside of the box stuff, you're right. It became sort of a what is the crazy thing that your team's going to do this time? But I felt like the team was so much more energized by that and excited. They wanted to be the person that came up with the crackpot idea or whatever, that became a thing. And we truly were, I think, more innovative than I have ever been able to be in any other role. It was my smallest team I've ever led, but it was a team of people who knew that if they had sort of a zany idea, but they could articulate what goals and objectives it could help accomplish,
Yep.
and were committed to measuring to make sure it did that, that they could do things that were incredible and
Yeah.
fun and
Yeah.
exciting.
And part of it's empowering, right? Part of
Mhm.
it's just empowering folks to feel like they can contribute. One of the things that we've instituted here is an editorial theme calendar where we have a calendar for the entire year. And every month we have teams that will ideate on, based on that theme, what's the type of stories we want to be telling? What's the content we're creating? And every single person on the team, no matter what role they have, they could be a creative, a content writer, they could be working on web, they could be an email social media strategist. They're all ideating on this and contributing their ideas. And so it's part of a culture that you have to build, that
Mhm.
people feel like they can contribute. But all it takes is, one or two of these big crazy ideas to take off. And then they're like, oh, wow, now I see my ideas coming to light. And so there's a whiteboard outside my office. And the question is, what's the next big thing that we want to do? And you have all these crazy ideas and we're prioritizing them and ranking them. What do we think we want to do next? And we explore that as a team. And it's a culture. And once you get a couple under your belt, it just naturally kind of blossoms.
It really does. And it's so fun and exciting to see people excited about their work. Like to have people in those rooms that are just electric,
Yeah.
is, I think, the best part about being a leader, to be honest with you.
And the best part is when you see someone, with a web skill set over here, a developer coming up with the greatest ideas of an experiential activation
Yeah.
or a new email campaign that's completely out of their realm.
Yeah.
That's where magic really happens, because they're all sitting on these great ideas because they're watching what we're doing. They're looking at the data. And so to create that narrative, I think also creates a sticky environment because they can
Mhm.
see that their contributions are taken seriously and we're finding ways to put it to use.
Yeah. And in my experience, the leadership of the institution always just went overboard with praise and
Yeah.
appreciation when
Yep.
these things paid off
And
too.
it matters,
Hmm.
to be in a town hall and for uh, my division to hear straight from President Tetlow that, we're up 25% applications this year. And that's in great part to the brand and the new strategy
Hmm.
that's unfolded from university marketing, the great partnership that we have with admissions. I mean, that goes so far. And then you walk out of that room and, colleagues are congratulating members of the team for the work they're doing. And that means a lot,
I
right?
love that.
Because, we do a lot of great work of storytelling and building awareness of all our thought leaders, our researchers.
Yep.
Um, and so it's nice for the team to be recognized by those colleagues as well for the work they're doing.
Looking back on your career, is there an early career moment that you feel like really set you up to be the type of leader or to lead in the way that you lead today that makes you successful?
Hmm. Yeah, I think great mentors have really helped me get to this point. Ironically, my first stint in the agency world, which is right out of college, I started working for an agency that ultimately got acquired by Omnicom. But I was with that agency for 10 years. It was called Creative Channel, and they were out of Los Angeles, and it was a retail marketing agency. I started at the bottom of the rung. I started, with kind of the lowest role that had a salary, and luckily I had leaders there that took me under their wing and really mentored me, and I was able to go into director roles and ultimately was a VP in various roles. I was there for 10 years. And it was thanks to one, being curious, and having that curiosity with mentors and leaders that would take the time to invest in me. And
Mhm.
so that's one of the things I like to give back to members of not just my team, but others within the organization who are looking for that mentorship. But ironically, everything comes full circle. The CEO of that agency that was a great mentor to me, lo and behold, is a Fordham alum of all
Oh,
things.
wow.
And so when I was applying for the Fordham role, I called Andy Restivo up and I said, Andy, you're not going to believe this, but I'm applying for this role at Fordham. And of course, just, he was completely ecstatic, and he then just hopped right in and, how can I help you? Right.
Oh.
And it's those relationships and bonds that really are defining, I think, to
Mhm.
shape you into who you are as a leader. So I would encourage folks listening, if you don't have those types of mentors, seek them out, look for
Mhm.
them. And if you can be a mentor like that to someone else, it is the most rewarding aspect of leadership.
It absolutely is. Being able to see someone do things that they didn't even dream they'd be able
Yeah.
to.
Yeah.
It's so rewarding. I was just this morning talking about someone who was an executive assistant when I met her, who is now on the cabinet of a university,
Wow.
like 9 years later.
Phenomenal.
And that's me because somebody believed in her and gave her a chance to show what she had. And
Right.
when she showed what she had, it was top notch. And like you were saying, curious, open,
Hmm.
asking the right questions. All of it started from her approaching me to say, "Hey, can I talk with you about your career trajectory?" And she just impressed me so much. And now look at where she is. And I'm like, I kind of get a little teary eyed about, being able to play that role for someone.
Yeah. Well, and I think mentorship, the one thing I've learned is it also takes tough love. I never want a mentor just to tell me, how great of a job I'm doing, or I want them to have the tough conversations and to push me to think, why am I making this decision, and question why I did something, and help me really think through to pressure test the decisions I've made. And so I think that's also part of what I try to pass on if I'm in that in that position to mentor others. It's to really help drive critical thinking, because just to give pleasantries of "you're doing a great job" is not going to get them where they want to go, but also pushing them to be thinking about that next step, which a lot of folks just don't create the time to do. And I think that was one thing that Andy, my mentor, has always done. He was always giving me or pushing me to be thinking, so, but what is next? You're
Mm.
doing a good job, or you could be doing better here, but what's next for you? And I attribute where I am today to those types of conversations as just being pushed.
I love that and completely agree. So we're starting a new closing segment for this show, and that is asking my guest, what is your higher ed marketing hottest take?
Um, Experiential. Experiential. I mean, I had the blessing of, through my agency career, before I came into higher ed, I was with an experiential agency, helping them build a digital part of the business that was just missing. And so I learned a lot in that role, trying to think of how does digital, which I came from, handshake with experiential to deliver these really unified experiences that I'm experiencing the brand face to face, tangibly, but then I can walk away and also continue to experience it through retargeting and the app and all these other things. And so I became really enamored with how engaging with a brand physically, creating an experience, just creates so much more trust between you and the brand. And I think higher ed is in a position where we need to build trust with our audiences,
Mhm.
whether it's prospective students and their parents, whether it's influencers like counselors or employers who we want to employ our graduates, or even alumni, right? We have to build trust with our audiences, and you can't always get that done through your channels. And so I think more and more experiential is the hot new ticket. I think you have to be really intentional about it. It's not always the cheapest mode, because it's a marathon, not a sprint. You can't get that
Mhm.
ROI immediately, because you're going to get people clicking through a link to then apply, or, raise their hand to be an inquiry. But I think experiential is the hot new ticket. And I think not just to do experiential, but to be really intentional, to think about where can you create tangible moments where you're shaping perception and growing trust that will pay dividends much longer, for years upon years, in that person's mind than an email or a social media post. So I think where leaders can think about how can they just dabble in experiential, crawl, walk, run, experiment with the experiential, give it a try. There's agencies out there to help you if you're not an experiential person, but it also doesn't take rocket science. You could do pop-ups at sporting events, at local high schools. Start small. And I think if you can do that, you'll start to reap the reward of building a different type of relationship with your audiences, that has longevity.
I love this hot take. I love this idea. I feel very confident you have sparked a lot of people to think about things differently today. If they want to chat with you after this, where can they find you?
LinkedIn. You can look me up, Justin Bell. Pretty easy to find. But then also my email. My email is jmbell@fordham.edu. Happy to chat with any other colleagues across higher ed to either share my experiences, but also love to learn from others as well.
I love that. And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn, JAIMEHUNT. You can also email me at jamie@solvehighered.com. That's JAIME@solvehighered.com. And you can find my book at heartoverhypebook.com. And as always, let's go bust some silos. Listeners, can I ask you a quick favor? If you enjoy this show, take a moment to give it a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. I'm a type A eldest daughter, so positive feedback is basically my love language. I also genuinely love hearing from listeners. You can find me at LinkedIn at Jamie Hunt. That's JAIMEHUNT. And yes, I am named after the Bionic Woman. You can also find me at solvehighered.com. Say hello, share a thought, pitch an idea. Don't be shy. I genuinely love hearing from you.